I do think that you have to start to look at the patterns in your life and take some responsibility there. I found myself millions of dollars in debt, a convicted felon. The tabloids were telling this really reductive tale that was certainly not showcasing any of the positive skills that I might have acquired by running these games, running this business.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey, and we've had some pretty wild guests on from fascinating stories. Today, we've hit the jackpot. Our guest, Molly Bloom, the former Olympic hopeful turned poker princess who built an empire hosting high-stakes games for Hollywood's elite and then lived to write the book and inspire the movie. From surviving wipeouts to slopes and facing down the FBI, Molly's story is a part glamour, part grit, and all guts. Buckle up because this is going to be a fun interview. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Remington Ramsey, that's such a good name.
Oh, well, thank you. I've got to be honest, Molly, I'm a fan. I've read a lot of books. I read a couple books every month. I distinctly remember listening to your book on audio, and I remember where I was mowing my front lawn, and your book, every 10 minutes, I was like, no way. And I would like stop and write something down. And then another 10 minutes would go by, I'd be like, no way, stop the mower, write something down. I mean, just incredible. And your story. So briefly, the highlights, at least based on the book, were you were Olympic skier, and from just a bad spill that was taken away from you. And then in the movie, at least, what takes up right after is the next big thing in your life was this poker game, which we're going to talk a little bit about. Then that was taken away from you. Then the book, and then that, it just feels like you're on this never ending. And most recently, I've been following your content. You're an advocate for women who struggle with pregnancy, with IVF. And it just feels like your story is one that is constantly overcoming big things. Have you ever had a chance to just slow down and breathe?
No, but I do think that you have to start to look at the patterns in your life and take some responsibility there. When I was 12 years old, I had really bad scoliosis, and they fused my top 11 vertebrae together and put 2 metal rods down almost the entire length of my spine. And I chose to ski moguls.
Yeah.
Against medical advice, against common sense. And so, I really have sought out these endeavors in which the odds for success were close to zero. And time after time after time again. And my dad's a psychologist, and he has his own ideas about that. And I've done some work, and, you just said you don't like to be bored or like to be boring. And I think that I am someone that has kind of chased a life of high adrenaline and excitement and danger. And, but I'll tell you, my life is very different now, but in a very real way, the most high stakes it's ever been, raising a daughter. So it's just a
Sure.
totally different mode that you have to get into.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to talk about that because your dad, portrayed by Kevin Costner in the movie, one of my favorite actors. I thought he did a great job. I did want to know, you mentioned, I've seen some clips of you talking about Aaron Sorkin, and Aaron Sorkin is my hero. I think he's a phenomenal writer. His shows, West Wing, Newsroom, you scored huge with that. And I know you feel that way because you said so on stage. What's interesting is you wrote the book, so the book is true. How much of the movie captured the book's essence, but was there anything that you felt like, it didn't really happen that way, or did the movie actually like nail it, or how'd you feel about it?
Well, my journey to Aaron Sorkin and to get the movie made was kind of an interesting, uncharacteristic one to start with. There's this misconception that Hollywood was knocking on my door trying to make this movie. The book, when I initially published it, did not do well. It didn't even out-earn its advance, which was small. And it was hard for me to get a book deal, to be honest, because I wasn't willing to, tell all these salacious stories. And so, when I found myself at the end of this thing and perhaps we're, didn't go all over in terms of chronology, but I found myself millions of dollars in debt, a convicted felon. The tabloids were telling this really reductive tale that was certainly not showcasing any of the positive skills that I might have acquired by running these games, running this business. And I didn't have any other ideas. And I spent time alone and thinking and walking in the mountains of Colorado. And I was like, there's a story here, and when I was little, I was a voracious reader, and I loved books and I loved stories. And then I, came to love movies. And I just thought, the story is the way out. And I wrote that book. It didn't sell, but that just, for me, when your plan doesn't work, but you feel it in your gut that it's right, it's just time to change course. It's just time to look at it from a different angle. And so I made this short list of filmmakers in Hollywood. The most prolific filmmakers, my favorite. I mean, the list was crazy. It was Steven Spielberg and Shonda Rhimes and Aaron Sorkin. And, the other factor that was contributing here was, as you can imagine, there were so many powerful people in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And DC, for that matter, and New York.
And didn't want the movie to be made because of that?
Who were running interference major. And
Wow.
Their voice mattered much more than mine. And even though I had fallen on the sword, even though, I'd foregone getting my money back and potentially stared down prison to not roll on people and to not drag them through this, they still didn't want any exposure. And so in making that list, yes, I wanted really prolific filmmakers that didn't have to play politics in Hollywood. Like Hollywood needs them more than they need.
Sure. Sorkin's he's been pretty vocal about not playing the game. Like he that's why he got out of TV. I remember him saying that. What was his work that inspired you to call on him? What did you like of his that you were like, I got to get him?
Well, I first of all have loved everything that he's done. I loved A Few Good Men. I loved The West Wing. I loved Newsroom. I loved Sports Night. I loved Moneyball, The Social Network. I mean, I've just, and on top of that, he was the highest paid screenwriter. So like if you're coming from a gambling background, that's also a great bet. But more than that, I watched his interviews, and what I saw was somebody who with sort of old school values, who was almost immune to the pressures of telling a certain story. Like he's going to tell the story he wants to tell. And so I just thought, listen, I know it's a shot in the dark. He gets sent Walter Isaacson's biographies and gets hired to write these incredibly important characters and stories. But, there's a million different ways to say it, that you miss every shot you don't take.
Yeah.
I just was relentlessly calling anybody I knew that could have proximity to try to get a meeting with him. And
were any of the people that you called to get close to him people that had played in your game?
No.
No.
Because it was tricky, right? I didn't even hire any agents because I knew that their loyalties, their fidelities were going to be to the movie star.
Players. Yeah.
Right. Like what's the upside for me? They're going to make 5% of my life rights. And I'm a one-off. They're going to sell me down the river. So I was navigating this almost entirely on my own, or with people that I had established a trusting relationship with. Like my entertainment attorney, Ken Hertz, is an incredibly successful, represents everyone, but he is a good human being, and you know it. And so he's the one that ultimately sent the book to Aaron.
Okay. So all that to get back to the original question, because I do know I read and I watched multiple times. It did feel very close, but you having written it and it's about your life, was there anything that stood out about the movie? You're like, that wasn't quite right.
When Aaron said he was going to write it, he said, let me explain to you what my process is. I go and I read a bunch of material, and then I go off and I write the story that I see in my head. So you're going to have creative control, and it might have a lot of deviation from your truth. Are you okay with that? And then I thought about it for a while, and I'm like, inside, am I okay with that? I have to be okay with that. And then I was like, wait, I'm his only source material. Like, he's going to have to use me. Like, I'm all he's got, And so for 8 months, Aaron and I worked together, which was such a incredible experience to have. The difference between Molly's Game and so many, almost every single biopic out there, is it stuck to the script. There are 2 major places of deviation, and I think they're both interesting. The only person that Aaron didn't speak to do research was my attorney.
Okay.
He sort of wrote his own experience with my story into the attorneys because because when he first heard about it, he was judgmental. He saw these like New York Post covers and, me walking out of courts with with Chanel pearls. And he's like, I know this story,
Yeah.
And then when we had our meeting, he thought maybe this is different than I thought. And then he would randomly email me over the next month and ask me these pointed questions, which were the questions that Idris asked Jessica in the film during the arraignment, which ultimately helped him to see.
Oh, so you're saying not Aaron was emailing you, your lawyer was emailing you.
No, okay. This is I'm sorry, this is meta and confusing. Okay, so Aaron wrote his own experience with me, with my story, into the character of the lawyer.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was his way of defining that character.
I've got to imagine, I mean, the lawyer was portrayed really in good light. So I imagine he was at least pleased with the way he was portrayed in the movie.
Yes. And he is one of the most noble human beings who is unyielding in his fight for justice and fairness. And he saved my life. I mean, I had 8 meetings in New York City the day before the arraignment, and 7 out of the 8 attorneys said, you don't have any money. I'm not taking this case. And Jim was at one of the most expensive, high-powered defense firms. I have no idea how he convinced them to take my case on an IOU, but he did because he believed that there was something amiss, and he would have never brought this indictment. And I think he also saw my mom's face and my face, and he was like, he knows the system, right? So he knows that everything you do from the moment you step into that courtroom for your arraignment is going to determine the rest of your life. And they do so much to incapacitate you. They take all your money. They waited 2 years, and then in the middle of the night sent 17 FBI agents with machine guns. And, you're in this place where you're terrified, resourceless, and you have to make these really high quality decisions that are going to pertain to your freedom.
Mm. So if you haven't seen, if you're getting caught up and you're like, wow, she's saying FBI, machine guns, and all these stars. So let's fill them in a little bit. If you're not familiar with the movie or the book, which you should absolutely go out and buy both and partake, you essentially almost walked into this opportunity of being a part of the poker game, at least based on the story, and then took it over. Is that part of the movie? Is that adaptation pretty accurate?
Yeah. So I was working for a real estate development firm. I was actually studying to maybe get my real estate license.
Okay. That's good for our viewers.
My boss he said, I need you to serve drinks at my poker game. And I didn't know anything about poker. And I thought it was just going to be a bunch of frat boys sitting around, playing cards. And then the people that started to walk in the room I had no idea like what was going on. It felt like I'd fallen down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And you knew every single one of them, from stars to CEOs.
Well, I mean, it was people as the most famous people you can imagine, from politics, from Hollywood, from the business community, from Wall Street. I mean, it was just, you couldn't pay for that kind of exposure or access. And so I knew nothing about poker. I was mortified because my prep had been to make a playlist with songs like The Gambler on it, because that's what Google told me that.
I remember that part. Yeah.
I mean, I was like 22, I was in my early 20s from a small town. I was just like, okay. And then I really got this moment kind of midway through the game, because here were all these people who, to say they have impact, is really understating it. But I had access to them, and I had access to their very candid conversations. And I was looking at it from a networking perspective, and also just a learning perspective. Like, I love information. I love learning. I always want to know what's behind the velvet curtain in terms of like, what's the real information? What's the real story? And, in those early months, sometimes I just had a notebook, or sometimes I had my computer, but I just took notes the whole time because I found it so fascinating.
So they're walking in, and you're initially thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity for me, not only to learn, but maybe to get connected and start networking and get out of what I'm doing right now. Maybe I don't want my real estate license, which every realtor who's listening to this right now is, don't do it. So then you start to make those connections, and then ultimately you take the game over. Now, when you take the game over, and I know a big thing about your story in both the book and the movie is that you will not name the names. And that's what everyone keeps wanting you to do, to get a big book deal, to get the real big skinny, that you won't name certain names. You only name the ones that were in the deposition of the bad Brad case. At least that's the way they called it in the movie. So my question is Aaron Sorkin one of the people that also asked you to give names up to make the movie better?
No, Aaron. See, this goes back to the type of human that Aaron is. One of, if not the reason that Aaron wanted to write this movie and realized it was a different story, is because he said we live in a day and age where people will give up anyone for any sort of gain, and here you were faced with losing everything, and you wouldn't. Aaron. Very much resonated with him. That's why he felt that he could construct a movie heroine out of that. And when he signed on to make the movie, he was very clear with everyone. We're not making this a gossip piece. We're not, bringing in celebrities. He's the same way. He doesn't want to hurt people. He doesn't want to hurt families. And it distracts from the story.
Yeah. The scene where you're sitting in front of a lawyer asking if it was legal is a conversation that everyone who plays poker has at some point. It's like, is what I'm doing legal? And he's like, yeah. And you're like, no, seriously. You're like, yeah, kind of, but mostly yes. So, but there's a scene, the entire movie's rising up to this point where you haven't taken a rake, you haven't done anything illegal. And it's just mounting, the pressure's getting, and the music then drops. It focuses in on Jessica Chastain's face, and she takes the rake, and the entire shift of the movie is, okay, now we're doing something illegal. When that actually happened in real life, did it feel like that moment in the movie where, oh my gosh, everything is now changed? Or what was that moment like for you when you shifted that and took the rake?
I got to give a little context before.
Okay.
Just for people who might not know what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I was running these games. They were monstrous. I was making year one, I started making $4 million a year. I was paying my taxes. I hired attorneys on both coasts to analyze the federal statutes, and they gave me basically a playbook
On how to make money legally?
on how to do this legally.
So how was it? What are the Cliff Notes of that? How were you actually making the money?
So I was making money on tips, but I was in charge of nights. It's the basic laws of supply and demand. I was in charge of 9 seats at the most coveted, hard to get into poker game, which not only could you walk in with no money and walk out with a check for $5 million, because by the end I was guaranteeing the games. I was acting as the bank. I also was just almost psychotic about how I sat that table. It needed to be people that were interesting. It also needed to be people that had very similar playing styles and very similar skills sets, because then you get these big, giant outcomes results, but I'm keeping the books. And at the end of the year, everyone's okay. The house makes the most money and the game sustains. And so you could sit next to somebody, your life could change in an instant. I saw movies get made, hedge funds come together, all kinds of business deals get done. And it was also, it was run in a really professional way, whereas most private games are not. Now, the rules of engagement for me were like, don't have, women or men for hire, which I wouldn't have anyway. Keep drugs out of the scene, and don't, pay your taxes, and don't take a percentage of each pot, because you need a license to do that. And
did you ever look into getting a license?
I would have had to go to Vegas, and like in the poker rooms in Vegas, you can't keep pros out, and pros are what would have destroyed this game, because the pros would have won all the money. And then it would have been a much different thing.
Yeah. Okay.
People were actually tipping me for, and only winners tipped, was the credit that I was extending, and guaranteeing, the access to the seat, the overall like sort of experience that I had created, the opportunities that being at that game led to. And so there was this unwritten rule: if you won, you tip. And you know what? Sometimes people, one person in particular who won all the time, tipped really small, but he was good for the game, so he stayed, but that was the deal. And then, at one point, well, you don't go from, like getting a 3.9 in college and skiing for the U.S. ski team and having this really overground conscience to becoming a convicted felon overnight. It's a matter of these micro decisions that you make that start to veer a bit away from your moral center, what you believe in. And that's what happened. It's death by 1,000 cuts. That's why I'm like, I know now, I could make that decision today, and there's not a lot of consequences. But if I make it tomorrow again, and then the next day, then that becomes who I am. So I'm really particular about the choices I make, because I saw where it goes when you give yourself a little bit.
We've all seen it now. Well, your story is fascinating. And when you pull it up on Netflix, there's other movies and shows that are suggested that come up that are similar, like Queen's Gambit, Inventing Anna. Have you seen any of these? You know what I'm talking about?
I have absolutely seen Queen's Gambit and thought it was a tour de force.
It was a what?
Tour de force. I thought it was unbelievable. I thought it was a gorgeous series.
Yeah. So Inventing Anna, the story of Anna Delvey, she was most recently on Dancing with the Stars. And she was wearing an ankle monitor, an ankle bracelet. And her story was put on Netflix and did really well. And she was practically booed from the entire stands and was voted off extremely early. And there was a whole narrative around it. And it was interesting because I was thinking about when does the world give up and when do they cancel? And you are now speaking on stages about and you're about resilience and making the right choices. I mean, you're talking about micro decisions. I'm sure that's in your speeches, but also overcoming great odds to become successful over and over and again. That's something that you've proven that you've done. So how has the world received you? I mean, now that the movie's out there and your story's out there, I mean, initially it was Poker Princess was actually kind of a negative connotation when your story first broke. But now that the movie's come up, it kind of cleaned up some of the actual details of that and the fact that you continue to not divulge certain information that everyone wants you to. Do you feel like you're canceled? Do you feel like you've recovered? What do you feel like the world feels about your story?
You know, I had this moment. I had just gotten sentenced, and thank God I didn't get prison time. And I really attribute so much of that to Jim's representation, his reputation as a human, as an attorney, and as a former federal prosecutor who did incredible work in New York City. And so I didn't go to jail, but I was 35 years old, millions of dollars in debt, a convicted felon, a social pariah. I mean, my network was decimated. And the tabloids were telling this really reductive tale. And I didn't have a dollar, and I lived with my mom. And so that, I guess, counts as canceled. Nobody would pick up a phone call. But then I had this moment, and this comes after, there's a lot of in between here. There's a lot of things that I did to get this kind of clarity and to reach this point. And I guess one of the biggest ones is meditation. But I had this moment where I was just like, my whole life, I've been killing myself to try to measure up in my family, because I have, my youngest brother is a 2-time Olympian in mogul skiing. He was #1 in the world, won a bunch of world champs, and then went on to play college ball and got drafted to the 5th round of Philadelphia Eagles. And he was like an Abercrombie model and started this charity in our hometown. And then my middle brother's a Harvard-educated cardiothoracic surgeon who is also the best dad and the best husband. And, you know, these were these prodigies were who I grew up with. And so I had just been so driven by this feeling of unworthiness or lack of measuring up. Yeah. And I had made my entire identity what I could produce, what I could, it was all external. And I had this moment where I was like, I'd walk into the Soho House in Hollywood and people would whisper and I thought that experience, that failing that spectacularly and embarrassingly in front of the world would have ruined me. But I had this moment of like, man, I'm free. Like I'm free. I'm liberated from this crushing weight of feeling like I always have to be perfect, look perfect, sound perfect, make a ton of money, never make a mistake. And I just had this, it was a kind of like a spiritual moment. And it was all up to me, whether I was going to stay on the bench, living with my mom, never trying anything again, or getting back out there and architecting a new future for myself. And when I went out there to take these risks based on this analysis and this strategy that I had created, I was unstoppable because I didn't care. My ego was like not involved. People wanted to reject me. That's fine. On to the next. It was this, I lost everything and faced my biggest fear and found that I was still breathing and in a way untethered to this stuff that doesn't really matter. And so
that's where I want to focus on my follow-up question, because I've got really to end the show. I'm more so curious about, you sat at the table with the rich and the famous. You hosted them. You know them well. This podcast was started primarily for top real estate professionals all across the country. These guys are making millions of dollars in real estate, being told that money and fame can buy all their problems away. You've seen it at the highest level possible. You've sat at those tables. Let me frame this question this way. Does money and fame fix all your problems? And follow-up question, what is the hope that you've seen in your own life as to what to focus on and what success actually means?
I think more times than not, money and fame doesn't fix your life. I think it leads you down a path that is very destructive and very empty. And almost every single person I knew was miserable and sort of like sick inside. And I got that way too. The ones that were not were the people that did not allow money to buy them sort of a status in which they believed that they were above everybody else. They were people that, were married and really worked on themselves to not cheat on their spouses, and they ran their companies in a generous and not egoic way. They wanted all their people to win. They're the ones giving like equity to their employees and treating them really well and not just focused entirely on the bottom line. They're the ones that make their life about something bigger than themselves. Because what money allows you to do, you can buy a lot of friends. You can buy a lot of people. You can outsource every single frustrating thing in your life. And you can just become this like person who never has to do what they don't want to do and never has to act in an organic way that you'd have to act to have a relationship. And so, what I saw was that it kind of made people a prison of their own making. And their life skills atrophied. They no longer had these nourishing reciprocal relationships. And I think somewhere inside they knew, if this all goes away, so does everyone in my life. And I saw that play out in real time. I mean, my one best friend who stood by me, Allie Kay, I know who my people are now. I know who stayed and I know who left and I know who came back around. And I think it's human nature, and I'm not angry about it. I just see it.
Yeah.
Without question, money can be great. It can allow you to help a lot of people, to live an incredible life. But there needs to be something about your endeavor that is purpose-driven, that is community-driven. It can't just be this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of, let me just use my money and influence to continue to reinvest in myself over and over and over. And even though it feels like that's going to be the way to happiness, that's the way to misery. So I think there's a formula for overcoming odds. And I talk about that. I talk about what the real moves to be able to, look at the world. AI is going to take over everything. The economy, this, the economy, that, and just be like, I see that, and I'm going to figure out a way around all those things. And so I go into real practical application steps that I've done in each season where I've had to either climb out of the gutter or climb the mountain. But the thing that I'm really excited about talking about, and I talk about a lot is, and I think it's really relevant for agents, is this new book I'm writing on effective presence, effective with an A. And effective presence is the science of how you make people feel. And we've heard a lot about emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence, EQ, gets some things wrong. And this is more about, let's learn the rules of, what makes a person feel good, what makes a person connect with you, what makes a person feel good in your presence, because those feelings are going to dictate the decisions that they make. And so effective presence posits everybody leaves this emotional footprint on the world. Like, the people, they walk into the room and everyone's like, ugh. Or the person that walks into the room and everyone gets excited because they lift up the vibe. And there's this very real thing called emotional contagion. And so it's the study of how to connect with people on an emotional level. And the more we find out about the brain, the more we know that emotions are used to make decisions in every capacity. And so people will be more likely to do a deal with you if you've made them feel good, even if there's somebody more qualified or, has a slightly better product. So it's super learnable. It's really important. And I think with the question mark of what skill sets are going to be important in this day and age of AI, being able to connect with humans, being able to be someone who leaves a positive emotional footprint on the world and gives people that connection and that feeling of worthiness and trust, I think is going to become even more important. And there's just crazy, interesting science behind it. So
sounds like it. That book is tailored perfectly for anyone in that sales realm. And that's when can we expect that to come out? You're still writing it?
Yeah. So I'm pretty much, the way that I do a book proposal, I pretty much write the book, but I've just been waiting to sell it till I'm going to sell it in the new year, and then probably 6 months after that. So,
well, again, if you want to hear Molly speak, and better yet, if you're like, wow, that movie was awesome, that book was awesome, that speech was awesome, there will be opportunities to meet Molly at the event as well. So be looking for literature on that, rplelevate.com. Just so you know, if you want to impact who we have on the show or what we talk about, email us at podcast@realproducersmag.com. Just found out last week we are the top 5% of all podcasts, not just real estate podcasts, but all podcasts globally. Thank you, Molly. And Molly's going to give us a boost into that 4 or maybe even 3%. And so if you want to help us grow, share this with one person. That's all I'm asking. If you're listening to this and you're like, who needs to hear this encouraging word from Molly? I'm going to send it to my friends. Send it to them right now. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Ramsey.